Texas held its primary elections last night. Believe it or not, the midterm elections are now a mere 8 months from now. Democrats are looking to make gains everywhere, and they may. But long term, the state of Texas is their top priority, and it's easy to see why. Texas is a huge state. It's the biggest state that votes Republican. If Texas goes blue, goes Democrat, it's over. Republicans cannot win a presidential election without Texas. America would then be a one-party state for a generation at least, and maybe longer, given the modern left's growing intolerance for anything that resembles public dissent. So with the stakes so high, and they are, what wouldn't Democrats do in order to win? Why wouldn't they encourage non-citizens to vote? Of course, they're already doing that explicitly in other states. In Texas, it would make all the difference. Texas has the second highest percentage of non-citizens in America after California. There are more than 3 million non-citizens in the state overall. For perspective, Hillary Clinton lost Texas by only 800,000 votes, so you do the math. The temptation is there, it's overwhelming. So what actually stops non-citizens from voting in Texas? Good question. Not much. Registration in that state is conducted on the honor system, as it is in many states, most. The only way that you are outed as a non-citizen voter in Texas is when you decide to admit that you are. Texas just assumes that all voters are telling the truth. Imagine if jewelry stores had the same policy, and they assumed that nobody would ever consider stealing a necklace. That's crazy. Well, elections are more important than necklaces, but for some reason, we don't act that way in most states. According to the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, there is already ample evidence of widespread illegal voting in Texas. The state just investigated 4 of its 254 counties and 165 unlawfully registered non-citizens who'd been removed from the voter rolls. Those non-citizens had cast more than 100 illegal votes before they were caught, which kind of makes you wonder what's happening in the state's other 250 counties. We don't know. We can guess. Now, so you even mentioned the possibility of illegal voting, and the left pretends, well, that's not real. It's not even possible. Of course, they know better because, again, it's happening. They're lying because voter fraud benefits them. This is what foreign interference actually looks like in an election. Democrats are openly pushing it. When they aren't making it easier for illegal immigrants to register to vote, they are fighting efforts to identify fraudulent voters. Then they're demanding outright amnesty would make the whole scheme legal if it passed. Republicans are helping them with that for some reason. A brand new electorate from a different foreign country. That's what they want. Vladimir Putin was never that ambitious, by the way. J. Christian Adams is president and general counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. His organization has been trying to obtain voter roll information from 2 of the largest counties in Texas in an effort to expose illegal registrations. He joins us tonight. Christian, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Tucker.
So when you hear people say this doesn't happen, I mean, there's so many questions. We know what happens. The real question is, why aren't states, why isn't Texas specifically doing anything to prevent non-citizens from registering?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Sometimes the left gets involved in litigation. They try to stop us from doing anything. There's a trial taking place in Kansas right now because Kansas tried to do something. And the ACLU and a whole bunch of international law firms, DECREPIT, big, huge law firm. DECREPIT is
Why would DECREPIT, Price and Rhodes try to abet illegal voting?
Well, that's what they're doing. They are attacking the state of Kansas citizenship verification. Look, Tucker, Americans should be electing American officials, not foreigners. In Texas, we asked for the voter roll cancellations of non-citizens in Harris County, which is Houston, and Barra County, which is San Antonio.
Right.
We have a right to that information under federal law. Those 2 counties are stonewalling us and not letting us see the data.
Where's the Attorney General of Texas in this?
The Attorney General in Texas, Ken Paxton, is doing a great job on this because, let me tell you, the problem's worse than you just introed. It's much worse than that. They're finding in Texas non-citizens on the rolls across the state, and they're doing it in a way that very few states are doing. Most states have the honor system. You check a box, you say you're a citizen, you're on the rolls, period. No further investigation.
I don't understand. We've spent the last 2 years embroiled in a scandal that has basically stopped normal work in Washington, and it surrounds the idea of foreign interference in American elections. Here you have actual documented evidence that foreign citizens are affecting election outcomes. They're voting, the most sacred thing citizens do, and the left says, yeah, we want more of that. How does that work?
Well, because they like it. That's why it works, is because they enjoy how foreigners are voting. And so they hide the ball, they lie, they don't tell the truth about the extent of the problem. They try to prevent us from figuring out how bad the problem really is. And so that's what the left...
That is so cynical. It's hard to believe. As cynical as I am, it's hard to believe that that's actually happening, but it is. So, but my question is, Illinois is a Democratic state. It's got a fake Republican governor, but Texas has a real Republican governor. It's overwhelmingly Republican. For now, that'll change soon if they don't get this under control. So why doesn't the legislature pass a law saying you have to show that you're a citizen before you register?
Well, they may well do that in Texas. It's called documentary proof of citizenship. That's what Kansas did. That's why DECREPIT is suing Kansas along with the ACLU. Anybody who tries to do something about this, whether it's my organization, we have a case in Starr County, the ACRU, where we're getting non-citizen records in this tiny little border county. Anybody who tries to do something about this is attacked by the left, by big money.
But on what ground? I mean, look, I know that the truth is they want voter fraud because it gives them power and that's all they care about. I get that. But what's the pretext? Like, what's their excuse for preventing citizenship verification?
Same one that the Oakland mayor said. It's racist. If you attempt to verify citizenship, you're discriminating against Hispanics. That's in the pleadings in the ACLU.
Really? Because guess whose vote gets diluted by this? African Americans who've been here for hundreds of years, and if anybody, they have a right to representation, and their vote is becoming irrelevant because of this. Does the Congressional Black Caucus ever speak up about this?
No, and that's what's happening in Los Angeles City Council, as a matter of fact. Because of non-citizens being counted in Los Angeles, African Americans do not have as many seats because of non-citizen Hispanics being counted in Los Angeles.
I hope someone speaks up because it needs it. Thank you. Christian, great to see you.
With what Hillary is saying, in the 9th month, you can take the baby and rip the baby out of the womb of the mother just prior to the birth of the baby. Now, you can say that that's okay, and Hillary can say that that's okay, but it's not okay with me. Because based on what she's saying and based on where she's going and where she's been, you can take the baby and rip the baby out of the womb in the 9th month on the final day. And that's not acceptable.
Well, that is not what happens in these cases. And using that kind of scare rhetoric is just terribly unfortunate. You should meet with some of the women that I've met with, women I've known over the course of my life. This is one of the worst possible choices that any woman and her family has to make. And I do not believe the government should be making it. You know, I've had the great honor of traveling across the world on behalf.
Ms. Eiffel suggests, is there any further reason to believe that what happened here was an attempt to avoid liability under what remains of the Voting Rights Act and the bail-in provision?
Well, I would just have to say that I agree with Ms. Eiffel's analysis on that. It was fairly extraordinary for the Justice Department to reverse that position after career prosecutors in the Civil Rights Division had for 6 years prosecuted very aggressively a claim with private plaintiffs that Texas had engaged in intentional racial discrimination in enacting its voter ID law, and in fact had prevailed through numerous federal court decisions before the new Justice Department had withdrew that claim. It was an unprecedented action that I think very much was an effort to avoid bail-in, and it just turned out that the federal courts that then continue to consider the decision disagreed with this Justice Department and vindicated the career lawyers. It was also notable that none of the career lawyers who had actually toiled away for years on that case through trials and hearings
by two Russian pranksters pretending to be the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And I tell you, what he says in these phone calls should be investigated.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hello, dear Senator. How are you?
Well, I've been reading about the new attacks in the eastern part of your country by Vladimir Putin, and it's not surprising.
So that's really a sad situation, and you know it's really a hard situation, and that's why I would like to tell you thank you that you support us in so hard time. So it's really helpful for us.
Well, I'm putting on a statement today and a letter to the President saying that it's important for us to provide lethal defensive weapons to your country and do it immediately. It is authorized in the legislation we passed last year.
You know, I would like to talk to you about sanctions, especially sanctions against Russia. We have also heard that you may be aware of the fact that our country has a very large package of sanctions against the government officials of Russia. We also know that there are similar laws in your country as well. We are disappointed to hear the recent news in the media that the United States want to lift the sanctions. How probable is this scenario in 2017?
Well, the Washington Post has an excellent editorial this morning that there is an absolute requirement to respond to the renewed activities. The title of the editorial is "Rockets Fall on Ukraine."
That's absolutely true, and our town Avdiivka had big damage from Russian army.
Well, I'm sending a letter to the President to urge him to announce the provision of lethal defensive weapons to your country, and none of us, and I'm sure you, Mr. Prime Minister, are not surprised that Vladimir Putin should decide to test the new president.
Absolutely, I agree totally, and I hope that President Trump will press on Putin because of these events. What happened?
And I will do everything I can to be of assistance.
I heard you want to make new sanctions, and we plan to make a new sanction against Russia because of hacking attacks. We want to make the same law in our parliament.
I have to be very frank with my friend, the Prime Minister, and that is that I do not know what the President is going to do. At least in the beginning, he's not been specific, but apparently for now, he is not for removing sanctions. As you know, we in the Senate and Congress have stated if that he relaxes those sanctions, we will act legislatively. That won't be easy, but we will certainly make that effort. It is a fact that Vladimir Putin tried to affect the outcome of our election. I will keep you informed as I hear of the decisions that are made by the White House. As you know, there's a great deal of confusion now, but we will continue to advocate, including our Senate leader, Senator McConnell, for maintaining sanctions and increasing sanctions. But I have to tell you, my friend, I cannot predict what this president will do. That's why we must keep the pressure on.
Do you think that Trump is a friend of Putin? Do you really think so?
I'm encouraged by the fact that after his conversation with Putin, there was no comment about sanctions. But again, my dear friend, I cannot predict. I think the important people right now is Tillerson.
So there you have it. The next time you think about Senator John McCain or Lindsey Graham or Mitch McConnell and their intelligence.
Epidemics are a large part of our history as a society, and every year they claim human lives in a variety of ways. Whether it's maggots making holes in our skin or the return of old viruses, here are some of the worst modern-day epidemics. Black fever. Also known as visceral leishmaniasis, the black fever is incredibly intimidating as it is spread by an infection of leishmania parasites after being bitten by sandflies. Many people may not even show symptoms as the illness affects internal organs and bone marrow. If treated, the black fever isn't fatal, but if left alone, the victim won't live very long as the epidemic spreads. MERS. Known as the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, the illness is highly contagious and can be fatal. It was first detected in 2012 in Saudi Arabia with symptoms like fever, shortness of breath, and cough. Vomiting and diarrhea can also occur. The CDC currently has MERS listed as an epidemic in numerous Middle Eastern countries, with no ending in sight when it comes to stopping the virus. Ebola. Ebola is one of the most feared epidemics of the 21st century with a fatality rate of about 50%. With outbreaks occurring all over the world, especially in poorer countries, cities all over the world are taking intense measures to quarantine people who were possibly exposed. Vaccines are in development, but nothing certain has been released to the public to try to prevent further infection. Zika virus. Before 2016, the Zika virus was considered to be a rare occurrence, but the virus has quickly become an epidemic in multiple countries thanks to a combination of mosquitoes and travelers. The virus can now also be spread through sexual intercourse, making it a new addition to a growing list of STDs. If affected by the illness, the victim will experience red eyes, fever, rash, and joint pain. While there is no vaccine, it is treatable with the right resources. Meningitis. Meningitis is an infection that causes swelling in the spinal cord and brain. It is very common amongst college campuses as well as countries like Nigeria. The infection is relentless and takes the lives of many people each year. Not much can be done since the symptoms of meningitis aren't caught until the infection has done its damage. Plus, vaccines against the infection are very expensive and deter people from investing in their health. Yellow fever. Angola is currently dealing with the first epidemic of yellow fever in 30 years, and the illness has affected over 350 people, with over 159 people killed this year alone. The outbreak is said to have started in the capital city of Luanda in 2015 and has spread to 5 of the country's 18 provinces. The disease is transmitted through mosquitoes, making it difficult to avoid infection. It also doesn't help the vaccines are in short supply. Malaria. While Doctors Without Borders are claiming that malaria is on a steady decline, there are still a significant number of people who are affected by it. Treatments for malaria come in large varieties since the virus has taken on so many different forms. Vaccines are being administered in third world countries in an effort to contain it, but with how rapidly malaria can spread, shots aren't being given fast enough. H1N1. Otherwise known as swine flu, the H1N1 virus has claimed thousands of lives. The epidemic first became well known in 2009 in the United States as college campuses were turning into live petri dishes for the virus to be spread, causing numerous public institutions to be shut down. Swine flu has now returned in 2015 in India and has claimed over 2,000 lives. Cholera. While cholera is an old virus, it still affects people who live in poor sanitation areas where the water isn't clean. The result is a lot of diarrhea that usually dehydrates its victims and they eventually die. In 2014, there were over 16 outbreaks of cholera in countries such as Cameroon, South Sudan, Haiti, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Niger. Measles. Measles has seen a resurgence in the last few years, with not as many people getting their shots due to either pricing or lifestyle choices. Studies have shown that those in higher income areas get treatment much quicker, assumingly because they can afford it, while those in lower income areas try to fight the illness on their own and wait it out. This causes exposure to more people as well as elevating the mortality rate of the illness. We hope you found this video informative and interesting, and we hope that you all stay safe.
Question that the 15th Amendment has limits. The Supreme Court made that very clear in Shelby. There has to be a high showing by Congress. The things that are in H.R. 1, I can assure you, are not going to be viewed favorably by particularly this Supreme Court, because they go way beyond what even Section 5 was. Yep. I mean, deciding that you have X amount of days of early voting, that doesn't have anything to do with racial discrimination, absent some high showing in Congress, which we haven't seen. Now, the Elections Clause is different. My written testimony goes into great detail about that this Congress should exercise that power as a last resort. A last resort is the term that was used by Alexander Hamilton. It was set up to preserve the federal government, not to mandate 30 days of early voting around the country.
That's right.
And with regard to the allegation that these constitutional claims are often raised to try to defeat civil rights actions, I will always go back to the Constitution. That's our foundational document, to see if anything, no matter whether it's Republican or Democrat, whoever is bringing a bill, does it meet constitutional muster? So I would hope that that's where we always go back to. And so when we seek to take the power away from the states in the 14th Amendment that says states, it's up to the states that they can exclude anyone who's participated in rebellion or other crime. I mean, you need a constitutional amendment to seize that power away from the states to make that determination. And I am impressed by a political party that thinks their power will come from people who have committed felonies and maybe are here illegally, don't speak the language that most do. At least 80% is a primary language. That's interesting politically, but here we're guided by the Constitution.
That's right.
And I want to go back to the Voting Rights Act. I was accused of being against the Voting Rights Act when I made very clear I had an amendment that would force the pre-clearance requirement on any area in the country that had a certain level of racial disparity. But Mr. Sensenbrenner and Mr. Conyers said, nope, we want to keep punishing. In effect, what their action said, we want to keep punishing children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren for the sins of the original person back over 50 years ago. And we want to keep that standard for 50 more years. We want to just keep punishing sins of long-gone people. And that's not supposed to be what America is. And so when we had the information that clearly showed that states had had improved and they were doing a better job than a district in Wisconsin, a district in Massachusetts, a district in California, why wouldn't we apply those pre-clearance requirements to any district where there was racial disparity? And I got much more consideration from Mr. Conyers on that issue than Mr. Sensenbrenner. Mr. Conyers, I said, look, I have, and this was outside the hearing, I've talked to deans of different law schools, liberal and conservative, they all say, you can't keep punishing people for sins of far gone others. You have got to punish sins that are current. And you've got to change that or the Supreme Court's going to strike that down. And Mr. Conyers said, you make a good point. Let me talk to our folks. And he ultimately came back and said, you got a good point, but it's already passed, so let's just see what the court said. Well, the court said what I was told by liberals and conservative deans alike, it's not going to stand scrutiny by the Supreme Court. It didn't. So I would hope we don't try to go back to that. If we're going to punish racial disparity, let's go where the problem is, and some arise in the future, as they have. But let's go to those districts and punish those by pre-clearance requirements, but not keep punishing people 50 years after they've corrected their actions. So I'm hoping that when the Voting Rights Act comes up, we will look to be more constitutional than the last slam dunk on others was. And I see my time's expired. I yield back.
Nancy Pelosi and her party's attempts to block the wall in spite of significant evidence that it's needed indicate that there's an unknown reason for their defiance. In May of 2016, U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited the President of Mexico, along with other congressmen, including little-known Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Discussing the delegation's meetings in Mexico City, Pelosi said the following: "We come here as a bipartisan and large delegation to express our respect for the people of Mexico and the country of Mexico, to acknowledge our shared border and our shared values, and to learn more about how we can work together for the bright future for not only our two countries, but for our hemisphere." Who knows what the discussions actually entailed, but since that date, May of 2016, the Mexican president, Peña Nieto, was aligned with the Mexican cartels. As reported earlier this month, he's accused of taking millions from the cartels. Former Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto accepted a $100 million bribe from Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a witness has testified. Alex Cifuentes, who says he was a close associate of Guzman for years, told a New York City courtroom that he had told authorities of the bribe in 2016. Guzman is accused of being behind the Sinaloa cartel. Mr. Peña Nieto served as the president of Mexico from 2012 to 2018. Guzman has been on trial in Brooklyn since November, after he was extradited from Mexico to face charges. The timing of the former Mexican president being connected with the cartels is rather significant, because a former Democrat that walked away, Jeffrey Peterson, says the real reason that the Democrats will never support the border wall is that, like Mexico's former president, Peña Nieto, they're also being paid off by the cartels. To access the claims that former Democrat Jeffrey Peterson makes in detail, click the third link in the production notes below.
So as a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate. Great. Certainly when we first scheduled this town hall, it was supposed to come the night after President Trump's State of the Union. Events interceded, and that State of the Union will be next Tuesday. Can you talk a little about what you expect to see, or maybe what you hope to hear from President Trump next week?
I hope to hear from President Trump this coming Tuesday in his State of the Union address what his plan is to avoid future shutdowns. I would love to hear from him what his plan is to deal with our debt and deficit, what his plans are to deal with address the crisis at the border and deter future waves of illegal immigrants from coming in caravans or otherwise across our southern border. I do expect that he will speak to many, if not all, of these issues. And I also hope that he'll speak to issues about trade. I've been encouraged recently that, notwithstanding some of his earlier statements about protectionist trade policy, he's been speaking more recently about the fact that he would like to get to a place where we have free trade, where all Americans and people around the world can benefit from the things that come from free trade. And I hope to hear more from him on that front as well. I will say that it's a little surprising, very unusual to have had the original State of the Union address canceled. I haven't seen that happen before. And I hope I won't see that happen again. I didn't see the Republican Congress doing that to President Obama. I haven't seen any combination of Congresses do that with respect to a president of the opposite political party. I hope this doesn't become a trend. But in any event, I do look forward to hearing what President Trump has to say, and am grateful for anything that he has to say, especially with regard to making our country safer, more free, and more prosperous. And I'm grateful for the chance that we'll get to hear from him next week.
Do you feel like you missed out on a normal childhood?
What childhood? I don't know what that means.
A lost childhood and a loss of innocence. He blames the adults, not just those looking to profit from charming children, but also some with far more sinister motives.
I can tell you that the #1 problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia. That's the biggest problem for children in this industry.
The casting couch even applies to children.
Oh yeah. Not in the same way. It's all done under the radar.
Nobody talks about pedophilia.
It's the big secret.
And it's widespread?
Oh yeah. I was surrounded by them when I was 14 years old. Surrounded. Literally. Didn't even know it. It wasn't until I was old enough to realize what they were and what they wanted and what they were about and the types of people that were surrounding me till I went, oh my God, they were everywhere like vultures.
Vultures who Feldman says abused him and his best friend, the late child actor Corey Haim, his co-star in The Lost Boys.
Well, what happens if my mom is dating the head vampire?
Feldman says the trauma of that pedophilia contributed to Haim's death.
There's one person to blame in the death of Corey Haim, and that person happens to be a Hollywood mogul. And that person needs to be exposed, but unfortunately I can't be the one to do it. But the person that knows who did it and knows who he is watching right now, I guarantee you. Yeah.
Intriguing.
Yeah. There was a circle of older men that surrounded themselves around this group of kids. And they all had either their own power or connections to great power in the entertainment industry.
Feldman won't name names. And he admits his friend had a struggle with addiction, which he says was a mechanism to cope with his demons. It was a symptom.
It was a symptom, correct.
Are we in it?
In 2008, the two Coreys confronted each other on their reality show about the dark past they shared.
You let me get around in my life, man, raped, so to speak, when I was about 14 and a half, and I'm saying this right now. What'd you do, man, when you saw that going down when I was 14 to me? What'd you do? You knew about it.
You want to talk about the
brought by the Attorney General of the state of Maryland has proceeded beyond the motion to dismiss stage. The judge allowed the suit to go forward, and there will be discovery, particularly with respect to the Trump Hotel and what's been going on down there. There are two other lawsuits, one in the Federal District Court in New York, which was dismissed. We are appealing that one, and another one brought to the District of Columbia by Democrats in the House and Senate, and we have yet to get a ruling on that. But only one of these suits, and that includes the Maryland suit, need to proceed for us to get a ruling from the judge as to what the Emoluments Clause requires the president to do by way of desisting from his receipt of unconstitutional payments from foreign governments.
Congress, which
There's a reason you were down in San Antonio.
right, yeah, it was to do the Battle of the Border, and we did this special. They had 600 people at the JW Marriott, and it sold out in maybe half a day. And they could have put another 1,000 people, I think, in there. They did a great job putting this together. The whole Fox Nation producing crew, led by John Finley, put this all together. And with Tommy Lair in there, we were able to talk about this story, but from the prospect of a border state that has 1,200 miles of border with Mexico. They can't believe, for the most part, flabbergasted that we're having this debate in New York and Washington, and no one's talking to them. Right. So here's a little of the Battle of the Border.
Americans want a secure border. We expect Congress to deliver a secure border. I do think it's an emergency. Texas is at the front of this. And
Greg Abbott, governor of Texas.
Congress has to step up.
Tell me about your reaction to the fact is the murder of your nephew was an illegal immigrant.
It actually should have been preventable. This never should have happened. He should have been deported.
We still have a wide open border. We're dealing with human trafficking every day. We're dealing with drug smuggling.
The problem is, how do we keep them from coming in? They are coming in. Well, the wall.
Nancy Pelosi's sinister plans to become President of the United States, until it was thwarted by our POTUS. On Thursday, January 17th, Pelosi attempted to leave the country to meet with certain U.S. military leaders and world leaders to arrange the assassination of President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. Here's some questions all of you need to ask yourselves regarding this latest event, along with some answers that my trusted sources have provided. Why was Nancy Pelosi so eager to fly away from the country with 93 of her family members, along with 6 Democrat representatives and members of their family, plus an unusually large amount of luggage? Why did Pelosi want to travel in a military plane? Why did she want to personally select the crew of the military airplane? Was she wanting to have Pelosi-allied military guys as crew, perhaps? Why was Pelosi's first stop in Brussels? At NATO headquarters. The Pelosi delegation planned to meet NATO commanders, U.S. military leaders, and these key allies: Soros cabal Merkel, Rothschild cabal Macron, Deep State cabal, President of the European Commission Jean-Claude Juncker. Also, why was Adam Schiff on that trip? Prior to the John F. Kennedy assassination in November 1963, the entire cabinet was flown to Tokyo, Japan. At the time of the JFK assassination, the entire cabinet was out of the country. Were Pelosi and Adam Schiff preparing a new Nancy Pelosi cabinet? Why did Pelosi want to fly away at all costs? Why did she want to fly away with Adam Schiff, plus 6 other Democrat congressmen and 85 of their family members? During a government shutdown? Very unusual. Is this a deep state plot to assassinate President Trump and VP Pence and replace them with Nancy Pelosi as President of the United States? There have been a dozen assassination attempts on President Trump. I knew of one of them, but I didn't know that there were more than that. I found this out from one of my trusted sources, Dr. Dave Janda. I want you all to watch this clip of Dr. Dave Janda being interviewed by Greg Hunter in August 2018. Listen to everything that he says, especially the part about how our POTUS differs from JFK in terms of protection.
It is a failed coup. And it's the biggest domestic espionage case in the history of the world. And it involves coordination with other intelligence agencies around the world, in particular the British GCHQ that was also involved. That Stephen Halper character and throw steel. I mean, this was a multi-pronged attack, both domestically and internationally, against the duly elected President of the United States, Donald Trump. And it failed. And it's failed, yes. I'm sorry. I usually have something, clever to say, but I'm speechless. I mean, a multi-pronged attack, globally, orchestrated multi-pronged attack against a duly elected president, and it failed.
Yes, and I think the evidence is all there.
Yeah,
that's not just conspiracy theory.
No.
It's based on documentation.
There's documentation at the Department of Justice, the Inspector General report by Horowitz, the phony FISA applications, the using fake material paid for by Hillary Clinton to fraudulently apply for spying on Donald Trump, his campaign, and his administration. How well Trump is protected. I mean, everybody thinks he's going to end up like JFK. I don't think so.
Couple things. I believe there have been a number of assassination attempts on his life since he took.
The press has not reported, or they have not said, or whatever.
And let's add that to the list that we spoke about earlier. I've been told that there have been close to a dozen attempts on his life, and obviously he has survived those. I believe the difference between JFK and Donald Trump is the following. Donald Trump has the support of the military. Donald Trump, I believe, has not only the Secret Service protecting him, but I believe he also has another layer of protection that he has arranged for, that he's paid for himself.
Yep.
For him and his family.
Yep.
And I'll tell you something. You can love him or you can hate him. But I don't know how the man functions day to day with the threats on him.
On $1 a year salary.
Even if he was making $1 billion.
No, but he's making $1.
I know, but even if he was making $1 billion, that's why he is beyond under the microscope. He's under the microscope, but he's also under not just a gun, he's under a howitzer every day. And it's amazing, you know, he'll do a big rally, you know, in Pennsylvania, he'll do a big rally in Florida, he'll do a big, I mean, you know, he's on the go all the time. And the fact that he has so many deep state players that want him out of the picture, and the fact that he is willing to put his life on the line every minute of every day, to me is incredible. And I don't know how a guy 72 years of age, let alone a guy 32 years of age, has the energy this guy does and has the drive this guy does. And it's remarkable, because I can tell you the deep state players of the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis never anticipated the turn of events that occurred in November 2016. And I think every day that goes by overwhelms the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis of the deep state and has put them in a position where they are desperate and hysterical, and that's why you see their puppets acting up, such as the Brennans, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bushes, the Romneys, the McConnells, the Ryans, just to name a couple. They're desperate, they're hysterical, they've always played great offense for decades because they've been able to, because they ran the whole system, and they don't know how to play defense. And now they're in huge trouble.
And that is Trump's intention.
Soros in there too.
Oh, Soros, okay. You're saying it's Trump's intention to go after the very top.
Yep.
The you know, as the one banker, the Luciferians at the very top. You know, we're part of the 8,000 people that worship Lucifer, according to one banker I brought up a week ago. He was on a very long interview. It's a Dutch banker that said, I can't remember what his last name is,
but he said it's about 8,000, 8,500 people, are, into Lucifer and devil worship and child sacrifice and basically using people for what they want to use them for sex or whatever they want to use them for. You're saying that they're going to go all the way to the top. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are going down. I mean, that's still the stated goal.
Yes, and here's why. And you and I have talked about this, Greg, in private. If that doesn't happen, then nothing will have changed. If they don't cut the head of the snake off of the deep state, nothing will have changed. And Trump, I believe, is aware of that. And he realizes what his mission is and how it has to happen.
And anything people need to do, anything people could things be destabilized when all these you said they're not going to roll out 1,000 at a pop. They got 40,000, and someone's going to be using leverage. When they start rolling out things with John Brennan, I'm sure that won't be the only indictment. You think that they could get destabilized in the financial community?
I think things could become destabilized in the financial community. I do believe, and you and I have discussed this before, I do believe there is an economic reset that's going to occur. I do believe that Trump, with the assistance of the military, will have assets pre-positioned around the country to ensure peace for the time this transition takes place to existent rule of law and a better financial system that ultimately is fair and, if at a minimum, more fair and more honest than it currently is. I do believe that and I know it sounds I don't know, bunker mentality like, but I don't think you need to have a year's supply of food around. But I think that it's a good idea. You have insurance on your house, you have insurance in your car, you hopefully have insurance in your health. I think you should have insurance on your food and water supply. I think you should have the necessities, and I also think you should have a means of helping your financial well-being. I think that, if you look over the 5,000 years on Earth, the two of the entities that hold and maintain value in times of distress, just look right now in Venezuela, are gold and silver. If you have a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, have some food, have some water, have a means of defending your family, your property, yourself. And I think that's important as well.
Do you think this is
the good news, Greg, the good news is I truly believe our country will be far better off, freedoms and liberties restored, and a way of life restored that is not a two-tiered system of one set of rules for the players in the deep state and one set of rules for the rest of the 99.9% of us. I believe when it's all said and done, the country will be far better off, every American will be far better off, and the world will be far better off when the deep state is finally held accountable and the highest echelon of the deep state through the middle level, through the lower level of the deep state is essentially neutered and thrown on the ash heap of history.